and tell them to come on in. We're going to try to keep this succinct, and I know that everyone is very tired, but you have a lot of great speakers in store for you. So first of all, thank you for joining this session on innovations in digital public infrastructure in Asia. My name is Vajanthi Desai, and I'm the manager for the South Asia region of the Digital Transformation Vertical in the World Bank. DPI is increasingly recognized as a crucial driver for a new wave of digital transformation and is helping countries to quickly scale and innovate digital services. Countries in both South Asia and East Asia are rapidly transitioning to digital governments, societies, and economies, yet they're at different stages of their DPI journey. While countries like Singapore, South Korea, India are recognized as DPI pioneers and are building advanced DPI's use cases, many others are at early phases of DPI deployment. That said, there are pockets of innovation and opportunities for learning across all countries. For example, even countries whose stories might be less familiar, like Bhutan and Maldives, are rolling out consent-driven digital ID solutions to make it easier for people to access government services remotely from the comfort of their homes. On data exchange, many countries in the region are at early stages, but in recent years, we're also seeing a great deal of innovation in this space, such as digital wallets for credentials like educational certificates, licenses, and income statements, which put people in control of their own data. For example, you'll hear from Singapore about how the SingPass, connected with MyInfo service, allows people and business to control the sharing of their data from official service sources of government agencies, businesses that they transact with. And on digital payments, there's a rapid rise of fast or real-time payments like Rast in Pakistan, and the emergence of cross-border use cases is seen with the interlinking of payment systems. For example, Singapore's Pay Now with Thailand's Prompt Pay, or India's UPI with Nepal's National Payments Interface. But even with these advancements in innovations, more work remains. As countries progress in their DPI journeys, trust and inclusion need to be prioritized. Key enablers, including appropriate institutional and regulatory frameworks like data protection, need to be put in place, and many countries in the region still have a ways to go. Other barriers and more systemic issues, such as digital literacy and limited affordability of data devices, as well as a lot of work remains on building cohesive strategies and bolstering the champions for digitalization across silos. Globally, the World Bank is supporting DPI deployment in 70 countries worldwide, many in Asia, who are building and strengthening their DPI. Building on all the groundwork to date through support from ID4D, GTPX, fast payment programs, the DPI agenda is now core to the bank's new digital vertical as a core focus of the Digital Global Challenge program. For Asia, we're also not stopping only at providing financial and technical support. We also recently launched a DPI research lab for South Asia associated with the Global One to build evidence on impact, which will provide policymakers with data and standards that they need to galvanize support for DPI investments and use. Today, we are joined by an esteemed panel of digital champions who will be giving a series of lightning talks, followed by a moderated panel. We'll first start with Abhishek Singh, who's currently the Additional Secretary of Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology in the Government of India, overseeing artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, cybersecurity, and digital skilling. He has previously served as CEO of National E-Governance Division, Digital India Corporation, and MyGov. Tanya Idris is convener, among other titles, convener of Digital Nation Pakistan Committee. Recently, Tanya served as a special assistant to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, contributing to the development of a national digitalization framework. And prior to returning to Pakistan, Tanya spent over a decade at Google, culminating in her role as Director of Product Management for Next Billion Users and Payments. She also spearheaded Google's expansion into South Asia, frontier markets for Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And lastly, Elizabeth Wong is Assistant Director of the Digital Utilities Program Office of Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority under Singapore's newly renamed Ministry of Digital Development and Information. The office oversees Singapore's digital utility stack, the term used in Singapore for DPI, She works on international strategy, including advancing cross-border use cases and global interoperability. So let's begin with Abhishek Singh and the journey that India has taken over the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Vajanti, for this nice introduction and setting of the context. And in fact, I must say that my job here, while I'll be sharing India's digital public infrastructure journey, has been made a lot easier because we heard from the man himself, Mr. Nandan Nilekani, who kind of built India's DPI stack, and what we are doing currently is building on top of it, trying to do. But what I will try to explore is that what all DPI does, what has been our journey, what has been the learnings, and what all countries who are trying to adopt, whether the 50 in 5 or whichever initiative, any country looking at to venture on the DPI journey, what all they can learn from what India has done. So if I can have my slides, I will have a few slides to ensure that I am focused because India's DPI story is so far and wide that one can talk for hours about on it. So like when we talk about India's DPI story, very often you all must have heard about the term India stack. So what is India stack? India stack is the basic building block that we built for our digital public infrastructure. It has 3 key layers: the identity layer, the payments layer, and the data layer. And this morning also we heard from Mr. Nilekani how these 3 layers become the foundational building blocks of the entire digital public infrastructure that we have built. Identity layer is, of course, the Aadhaar project, the Unique Identification Authority of India, the UID project, which has given 1.4 billion numbers, Aadhaar numbers, unique, biometrically identifiable, lifelong identity to all 1.4 billion Indians. And this is not just giving them an ID number. The more important value of UID is that it is being used. It is being used multiple times. In fact, every day we have 80 million authentications. 80 million authentications wherein people put their fingerprint, authenticate who they are, and that helps them access financial services, that helps them access ration cards, and they help them, empowers them. The DBT, the direct benefit transfer that we have built in, the total volume of, monthly volume of DBT has been like almost $465 billion, the total cumulative volume of DBT. And it's really a lot of savings. And DBT was a lifesaver when we had COVID, because when pandemic struck and we had to transfer benefits to people, we could transfer it digitally within no time and people could get whatever is due to them without any deductions, without any leakage. So whether it's pensions, whether it's scholarships, whether it's subsidies, all of it flows through DBT. More than 300 schemes are part of our DBT ecosystem. The payments layer, the cashless. We have heard about UPI, how India contributes to 46% of the global digital payments, and it has been it has been very transformational. Even small value payments go through the UPI. Many countries are replicating it. Brazil has built PIX, but the way it was architected in India is like the amount of volume that is there. It's totally free. Even small value transactions happen through UPI, and the volume, the numbers speak for themselves. 14 billion monthly transactions worth $245 billion. So that's the monthly transaction. And average ticket size ranges from 10 rupees to a few thousand rupees. So that's how it's doing. And then over top of it, once people had the unique IDs that help them get bank accounts. So we have 530 million new bank accounts that was created. And again, the banking story is such that way back in 2009, there was a report by Bank of International Settlements which said that if India has to move from 20% financial inclusion to 80%, it will take us 47 years. But guess how many years we did it? It was done in less than 9 years. So that's the power of technology that has happened. And it has also led to financial inclusion in the sense that to process a loan, to process a microfinance, to process a credit, because KYC cost has come down, it just takes a little less than $1, around $1.20 to process a banking loan. The third key layer, which is a basic building block, is the data layer. Like, how do we share? Because for all public services, for various financial services or credit services, we always need to share some documents. So the data layer, the data architecture that has been designed ensures that we are able to seamlessly share documents across ecosystem, and that ensures a paperless kind of governance. So we have a project called DigiLocker, on which we have 330 million users with more than almost 8 billion documents which are available on that. And that helped us in building, of course, the COVID vaccination platform, in which we were able to vaccinate 2 billion people with the digital vaccine certificates. And now with the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, the health stack that has been built, it has got almost 560 million users on that platform. So this faceless, paperless, cashless, these three form the basic building blocks of our digital stack. And on top of that, we have built a host of services. So there are several departments who are offering more than 4,000 services. Almost 1 billion transactions happen on a daily basis. And all these projects of various departments ride on the top of the India stack that is built in. So whether it's taxes, whether it's credit, whether it's agriculture, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, all these services are built on top of that. And when we do that, the core principles, in fact, Mr. Nilekani referred to it, like the core principles have been bridging the digital divide, ensuring universal coverage, enhanced experience, user experience, end-to-end. It's not that only a form submission should happen. So if you are applying for a scholarship, it should not happen that you are just applying. Only the front end is digitized. No, it's end-to-end, the entire back office flow is digitized to give an enhanced user experience, and people are able to get benefits from that. Whole of government approach, open APIs as a catalyst, single sign-on, and digital platforms are being built to improve the user experience. And what it does, like the entire architecture, this is a slide way back from 2013. We very popularly call it in our India Stack story as the Rajni slide. So the citizen is at the core of the entire strategy. And the outer layer is the digital public infrastructure, which is built by the government with support from the industry and the private sector, which kind of provides the basic backbone on which services are referred to or offered. The second circle from outside is the layer which private partners and industry partners build. Like on top of the public infrastructure, applications are built which people can access. And the last circle, last concentric circle closest to citizen is kind of services which are delivered. So this whole approach with regard to government providing the basic platforms, on top of which private sector building applications, and ultimately citizens benefiting on this. So this is the entire approach that we have taken to building digital platforms. Next, what happened? Can we have the next slide? Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So building this gives a lot of benefits to the government. So when we are delivering public services, the objective of any government is to provide good governance. So when we are building this entire digital layer wherein people are able to get better services more efficiently, it leads to good governance, it leads to a lot of benefits, it leads to transparency, it leads to accountability, it leads to efficiency, it leads to better quality of life, and as we call it, ease of living for citizens and ease of doing business for businesses. So that's the larger public service objectives that are met by building this digital public infrastructure. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and then not only public services, a lot is also benefited to the private sector, because once we have built this the DPIs, on the left you see the Aadhaar, the UPI, the DigiLocker, and the one which you are building for e-commerce, the one nation, one network for digital commerce, or the account aggregator Sahmati platform, which allows microfinance. So on top of this, private sector partners are building applications, and many of them have become unicorns. So the fintechs to open a demat account, to get microfinance, to get credit, to operate a cab aggregator like Namayatri does on ONDC. So a lot of layers private sector innovates on the DPI stack that has been built to ensure that more business services can be built in it. And that's where value is created. In fact, out of the 100+ unicorns that we have, 40% of them use the DPIs for their various services. Like, for example, KYC. Zerodha's founder, one of our top fintech companies, he was on record saying that earlier it used to take 50 pages of documents and more than 2 months to open a one demat account. But now you can do within a minute by using the APIs of DigiLocker and of PAN card, which is there. So it results in a lot of value in building this kind of platform. Next, please. Next. Yeah, so what we have done is that now that there's so much of demand after G20 about what we have done, a lot of countries are trying to learn from India, trying to see how they can replicate. So what we have done is that all our initiatives, IndiaStack.global, we have set up a portal called IndiaStack.global on which details of all portals, common code which is available, because all our platforms are based on open standards, interoperable, they're universal, how it was implemented, various project documents have been made available, along with key details of the officials which are there. And this portal is available in all UN languages. So several countries are taking advantage of that, and that's how we then kind of contact is initiated, and any country who's wanting to replicate or wanting to adopt or wanting to learn from what India has done and what we have built as a digital stack, that is information is shared through this platform. So IndiaStack.global is the window for getting to know more about all our projects. Next. Can I go to the next, please? So, and several examples. We heard about what MOSIP is doing, like the identity platform. In order to work for adoption of MOSIP, we have worked with several of partners. ID4D, World Bank team is here, which have been trying to work on leveraging the identity platform that was built by India and trying to replicate in several other countries. So the approach, the platform is similar, but kind of it gives us a opportunity for building similar platform elsewhere. So 18 countries are kind of working on the identity platform currently through the MOSIP initiative, and we have a lot of co-partners. So of course, India Social Development Fund that was announced at the G20 last year for $200 million. Then the Gates Foundation, the CDPI, the Digital Public Goods, Co-Develop, ID4D, World Bank, JICA, all of them are partnering in trying to create a institutional mechanism for replicating this. While evangelizing for DPIs is good, but ultimately what we need to do is to walk the extra mile and actually start implementing this. So this becomes very, very important in our whole approach. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and then like, for example, UPI is being adopted globally. There are several countries which have kind of integrated the UPI system that we have with India, whether it's France, Singapore, Mauritius, UAE, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan. And there are several countries which are currently discussing like how do we integrate their payment systems with UPI. Next. Then we have also signed, as part of our G20 initiative, last year we had a similar global DPI summit in Pune in June, and we ended up signing MOUs with 12 countries or so far. So several countries from Africa, like Armenia, Suriname, Sierra Leone, Papua New Guinea, Antigua, Trinidad, Tobago have signed MOUs with us. Next. And then Tanzania, Kenya, Cuba, St. Kitts, Laos, Colombia. So the purpose of these MOUs is to be the starting point wherein we have workshops, we have their delegations coming to India, we have kind of share our DPI story with them, and then let them choose which DPI they want to replicate, and then move forward on that. So this is the starting point of engagement that we have started with various countries. Next. So I will just conclude with a few enablers of India's DPI story, how we have been able to do that. And this has a lot of learnings for almost all countries. So the key enabler, as Mr. Nilekani also meant, was first and foremost, the lesson that we have from implementing it is to build partnerships. And partnerships, it cannot be done. DPI cannot be done just by the government. Having a partnership in which government works with the private sector, works with industry, works with academia, and works even with not-for-profits. And non-profits have contributed immensely in our DPI story, creating teams which have the expertise from the best of the industry. In fact, our DPI story was led by Mr. Nilekani, who came from the industry. He built up a team, and similar thing has continued in almost all our technology projects. Then building institutions, like it's not only to conceptualize a project. The technology is one part of it. Building an institution which can take the narrative forward to ensure that the interventions are sustainable. So we have the UID authority for Aadhaar, we have the NPCI for UPI, we have NEGD, Digital India Corporation, which are leading DigiLocker and other projects. We have National Health Authority for the Ayushman Bharat Health Mission. So that becomes very, very important, building institutions, empowering them, giving them funds, giving them the right resources so that they are able to lead that. Then process re-engineering. Whenever we are automating, it's not automating. It's not just copying, doing with the computers what we are doing physically, manually. Process re-engineering becomes a very, very important part. Then people, capacity building of people within the government. It's good that we are getting people from outside to augment our teams, but change management and changing the attitude and perceptions of people in government, making them service-oriented, also becomes a very, very important focus for success of many of these projects. Legal enablement. It's not just important to have the technology to be built in, or not just important to build the platform. Having the right legal changes, like making eKYC legal, making e-sign legal, having the Aadhaar Act, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, having the legal empowerment becomes as important as doing the technology initiatives. Then inclusion. It's not that we should not create a digital haves and have-nots. In fact, right from the beginning, our strategy was to also ensure assisted access through the common service centers. So we have a network of 500,000 CSCs through which people who don't have a device, who don't have a smartphone, who don't have a connectivity or don't have ability to navigate a government website can go and get assisted access. Similarly, building solutions in all languages becomes a very important initiative. And now as part of the AI initiative, we are building voice-enabled services So digital inclusion becomes a very important pillar in all our initiatives. Then security by design, security and privacy cannot be a patchwork, cannot be added on later. We have to build this because one wrong move and one data loss or one hacking into any government system can result in losing credibility for all of us. So having security and privacy integrated at the design stage becomes an important approach for us. And last but not the least, leadership. The kind of support we have got from our Prime Minister himself with regard to driving the initiatives, talking about these initiatives at all forums, reviewing it. So leadership support with any country which is doing that, that becomes very critical for the success of the digital transformation projects and the DPI story. Next, I think this is the last. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your time, and happy to be in the panel for the remaining discussion. Thank you.
So, Tanya. So over to Tanya, and if the clicker is not working, if maybe we could, in the middle, get a replacement clicker, that would be wonderful.
Let's see if, great, I'm going to see if this works. Nope. Okay, great. That's fine, we can go back. I'll ask for the slides to be changed. So first off, thank you so much, Vijayanti, for putting this panel together and for having us. I have both the distinct privilege, but also highly intimidating to be sitting on a panel with countries like India and Singapore. Pakistan is very early on its DPI journey. And what I'm going to spend the next 7 or 8 minutes talking about, which I hope can be slightly helpful for other countries who are also early on, is what are those things that countries need to, especially complex, large countries, devolved countries where power isn't and authority isn't centralized. What are those early things that we need to do to get things going? And a lot of what I'll talk about are lessons learned over the last few years. I've had 2 stints of advising 2 different prime ministers now. And I can't say we've done everything right, but we've learned a lot along the way. So if I could go to the next slide, please. These are 4 steps which seem very obvious, but when you're in the moment and trying to get things set up for success, without even one of these in place, it's actually very, very difficult to get things moving. So having a clear vision, you heard Nandan talk about it. There has to be a long-term strategy and a long-term architecture in view. You need to understand where you want your country to be, and those little steps along the way need to ultimately tie, whether or not everyone understands the whole picture, but there needs to be that central strategy that everyone is driving towards. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, is the right mandate and setup. Most of us, are from countries where governments are organized in verticals. And oftentimes digital and digitization is confused by IT. This is something we've now seen in Pakistan, but we've, having talked to several counterparts in several countries, it's often not the right place to be putting the journey towards digitization or a digital economy or what we call DPI. The right place may or may not be what may be the ICT ministry. It tends to need to be a body or an authority that is really empowered at the top, because ultimately this is a change management agenda. Right? It is a case of transformation. It's not just about technology. Technology is the enabler. And like, I'm from the private sector, so for anyone in the private sector, when you're trying to digitally transform a company, unless that change management is led from the CEO and from the very top, most often those digital transformation efforts don't go where they're supposed to go. The third, and you've just heard Abhishek talk about it, is strong partnerships. This is not the kind of thing that public sector can achieve ever on their own. In fact, if you're from countries that have lower resources, and most developing economies, you're not going to find the resourcing, the kinds of people and the kinds of minds that you need within the public sector. So you are going to need, it will need to be a public and private sector partnership, and not just public and private sector within the country itself, but also within kind of the broader global community. And the beauty of this, this conference is, I think this is now setting a pathway forward for this kind of a community to come together. And the last thing, and we often joke about it. When you're operating in any kind of political environment, where there is a political change expected. So, of course, there are some countries that don't have that pressure. But for most of us that do, the reality is when you're operating there, there are wins required. No one is going to buy a story of, oh, I will deliver this 5 years from now, right? They want to see results, and they want to see results quickly. So for that change management agenda to survive and to thrive, that last box number 4 that you see, which is relevant quick wins, which really tells you how you need to start to plan your use cases and your delivery for public service. So if I could go to the next slide very quickly, I'll just spend, I'll skip through some of these slides very quickly. This is our vision statement that we crafted. It's not going to be super different from what you'll hear and see from a lot of other countries, but ultimately it has the citizen at its center. Again, it's obvious by now. We've all been talking about it. Unless whatever you plan for has the citizen and the citizen's benefit at the center, you can't really move the economy forward unless you're planning every little step with that in mind. Could we move to the next slide? So just very quickly, I want to spend a minute on mandate and setup, just largely because for countries that may be struggling with what is the right place to be driving this DPI agenda, something that we've done in Pakistan is actually, we are now in the process of enacting through law a digital authority that is a horizontal and sits under the Prime Minister versus like a line ministry, which is a vertical. And again, the idea behind that is that you ultimately need a body that is empowered, that reports directly to the highest leadership, and then can drive the various owners of data. And there, again, in each government, there will be various owners of data, which become quite difficult to drive when you're looking at it vertically in silo as a ministry. So the reason I'm sharing this is just, in case it's helpful for people in the audience that may be earlier along in their journey. Along with enacting that by law, the other thing we have started to do is really think through use cases. And I'll talk a little bit about those because, I think the how we do that and what is the identification criteria and the prioritization criteria for identifying those use cases is actually has been a huge learning for us. So we could move to the next slide. Great, and just one forward, please. So, these are, again, this is not going to be very different from several emerging markets. These are the challenges of our current landscape. Again, most of you will relate to those paper transactions. Every ministry, every public service delivery organization has their own website. We're logging into it individually. There's massive reliance on just physical operations. So oftentimes you'll see in public sector that the front end or like an app will get launched for something. But on the back end, everything will still continue to be super manual. That is not digital, that is not DPI. And oftentimes, again, what will happen is politicians in power will look at that as a victory. On the back end, there is really very little benefit for citizens. So this is it's a critical piece that I suspect, and having, again, talked to several people, several countries are in that mode. Fragmented information on a business or on a citizen isn't connected on the back end. And they're just complex forms, languages, et cetera, and very, very long processing times. And what we want to, if we can just build up, please, one forward. And what does DPI help with specifically? So again, none of this is going to be news or rocket science, but again, very tangible next steps to what current environment, and this is very specific to us in Pakistan right now. So consolidated digital services, transactions are covered end to end. So it's not like you're starting off digitally, but then needing to go to a government office to get something done. Single ID for authentication. We've often talked about this. Pakistan is actually one of those countries that started its unique ID journey very, very early. And in fact, we have the entire country biometrically enabled. But thinking about that as the first layer, as Nandan talked about earlier, in order to actually enable those services, that thinking is being done now, despite the fact that you have an entire, we're a country of 240 million people. And then just automated processes and a consistent look and feel. So if I'm as a citizen, if I need to get service A, B, or C, I should get trained to be able to do that in a similar manner, because that's, that ultimately helps me both plan and takes the difficulty out of getting things done and dealing with the government out, which is fundamentally the biggest problem in several emerging markets. So if you could move to the next slide, please. This might be difficult to read at the back, but just very quickly, the reason behind showing you this is there is ultimately an impact on every single vertical, every single industry, if you can get DPI right. Whether it's financial services, you heard Abhishek talk about what's happening with payments in India, whether it's health, whether it's education, agriculture, and I'll give you a quick example on health. Because Pakistan has its entire population biometrically enabled, when COVID happened, there was a very quick decision made. So health is a devolved topic in Pakistan, which basically means all provinces manage health independently, which makes it very complex when you're trying to do a consolidated approach. So, there was a very quick decision made to take all the hospital data and all the lab data and connect it, through a very quick mandate that was passed out, and connect everything back to the unique citizen ID. And there were 3 things that we wanted to achieve through that. We didn't have a health stack in place per se, but we had some of the building blocks to put together the health stack in a moment of crisis and emergency. What we were able to do because of that was, number one, we were able to understand in real time where the disease outbreak was happening. As a result of that, Pakistan was actually one of the few countries that did not do a blunt lockdown. We did what we call targeted micro lockdowns, and the reason we were able to do that was because we understood every day we would start off by looking at the data. We were able to see where disease outbreaks were happening. So from an economic standpoint, actually economic recovery was far faster in a country like Pakistan. This was not a country that could have afforded to have done a 2 or 3 week lockdown to begin with. The second thing that was very important was to understand, again, where you needed, again, limited, reminder back, limited vaccines being delivered to countries like Pakistan. We had to understand that rationing. Where do vaccines need to be based on eligibility? And how many vaccines can we deliver given that it's a large population? Now, I distinctly remember this conversation between 2 senior ministers. We were doing back of the envelope calculations, and they were like, oh my God, we're going to have to do hundreds of thousands of vaccinations a day. At the peak, Pakistan did 2.3 million vaccines in one day. And while that may not sound like a big number, it's actually pretty huge for a health system that is devolved. And ultimately, the reason we were able to do that was because of the fact that the entire the vaccination platform was built on top of NADRA. NADRA is Pakistan's equivalent of our unique ID. And it's one of those stories that is very powerful because it's a case of reverse engineering DPI. So because some of those building blocks were in place, they weren't connected, but a very, almost critical use case came up in health, and you were able to take some of these building blocks and put together through them a way to do service delivery, at a time when the entire country needed it. So the reason this becomes important is for every country, the entry point or the way to show success using DPI may look very different. So in Pakistan, I've given you this example, and we've had several others where we've almost reverse engineered back into doing things that way because we have a real-time payment system now and because we have unique ID. But for country X versus Y, that may look very different depending on what the priority and the need of the R is. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So I want to spend 2 minutes talking about quick wins because, again, this seems to be generally the most critical thing to show success. So number one, you have to have your key stakeholders. Now, you may think that an agriculture use case is really important for your economy, but you may have an agriculture minister or an agriculture secretary that is just not interested. And the reason I say this is these are the practical things that create roadblocks when you're looking to do execution. So understanding who your key stakeholders are and then having their support when you're identifying what the right use cases should be. The second thing is doing something called service cataloging. So when we talk about public service delivery, the reality is the government and then each line ministry has to deliver hundreds of services. And those need to be very clearly cataloged, and alongside them, the data sources that make that service delivery possible need to be very clearly cataloged. This is work that can actually begin despite a country or an environment having DPI done or not having DPI done. Because when we talk about DPI, it feels like this goal that's very far, but there are little steps along the way that actually countries, regardless of what situation, condition they may be in, can start to get going. And then, as I mentioned, strategic prioritization, what may look really important may not actually be that easy to pull off, depending on the environment. And then just, this is, again, one of those things that we're doing and showing success and actually getting execution done and learning from it and iterating is actually far more important than continuing to plan and just not getting anything done. And just, if we can move forward. I think I'm actually short on time, so I'll skip a lot of this. Could we move forward, please? Okay, let's move. This is far more detailed into how we're doing service delivery prioritization. Let's keep moving forward. We can skip this. I just want to spend. Can we move forward? This is something building on something that Abhishek talked about. Just because a process works a certain way offline today does not mean that the process needs to work that way online and using DPI. So re-engineering and thinking through the process is really important. And this is true for any kind of service delivery. So this is just to show some kind of, this is the work that this is thinking work that has to be done when you're getting onto this journey. So let's just move forward. I just want to end very quickly with talking about personas. Can we move forward, please? Yeah, just a couple of more slides up. Just further up, please. Yeah, okay, now let's move up. The reason, so I have 4 or 5 different personas. Now, this is, again, very important as anyone, any government, any ministry is thinking about use case identification, but also mapping the journey back to the citizen. What does a citizen have to do to get service X done? The steps. And so putting yourself in the user's shoes, which is, in classic product terminology is called UX research. So, what we have here is, again, different. So we've taken it back down to literally talking about what a young student who's looking to get her educational certificates attested. What does she have to do today in an offline environment? And what could her life look like if we were able to leverage DPI to make this happen digitally? And if we could move forward, there's just 2 or 3 others. I just want to make sure that I'm prompting the thinking around this. Could we move forward, please? And just one more. So, this is a 60-year-old person who's diabetic, and, today his medical history is all on paper, it's fragmented and it's incomplete, and he's got to travel a lot of distance. He lives in a rural area to go and visit a doctor, so he ends up wasting a lot of time through that. And when he goes there, often unlicensed individuals end up treating him. So this is, again, a use case of a patient living in a rural part of the country that has to not just travel, but also cares about the kind of medical care that he's getting. And if we move one forward. So what you see here, sorry, just stay back. Yeah, what you see here is against those 3 or 4 different user journeys, you see how having DPI in place can help with him understanding who he's being treated from and whether they're licensed, making sure that his medical record is accessible from one place to the other, and him having the peace of mind that the medicine that he's getting is not counterfeit. So you can see, again, within health, there will be several user journeys. Within education, there will be several user journeys. So these are the fundamentals that, again, countries who are earlier on in their journey really need to be thinking about and starting to get done. I have several more. I'm going to stop there. But please, thank you for your time, and I look forward to speaking on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Now we're moving on to Singapore, and then we'll have a round of 1 or 2 questions afterwards.
Hi, can you hear me? Just want to test how the room is feeling right now. Raise your arm if you're here. Great, great. First time in Cairo? Nod your head if it is. Good, awesome. I'm not going to take too much of your time then so that you can hopefully see the city tonight. First, I just want to thank the organizers for the summit, as well as the World Bank for organizing this panel. Thank you to the presenters from India and Pakistan. I think a lot of points that you guys shared really resonated with the Singapore story. We definitely appreciate the points on the overlaps in your success factors and lessons learned, particularly around partnerships with the private sector. That's something Singapore, we always like to endeavor, as well as probably the pains as well as opportunities around the change management process. That can be such a teething process for us as well, but we've definitely had a lot of learnings from that. And I also thought that the point made from the Pakistan presentation on quick wins definitely resonates in terms of the need to see results. And that ties in with how we often try to partner with the private sector because we can move faster and we can have the combined proposition of what the private sector is good at in terms of go-to-market, perhaps some expertise, and the government side, we have the governance angle, but when we bring it together, we can possibly achieve speed to market or quick wins, because we can't just do it alone as government. So in my segment here, I'm just gonna share with you our Singapore digital stack. I'm gonna share with you our journey in terms of our learning points and how we look at DPI, our approach. I'm going to share with you, when I talk about our learning points, some of the principles that we apply, how we execute. I will be honest, I won't share the second order detail of our products and how we go down to that level, just because of the interest of time. But you can always catch me in the quarters or in the summit the next few days. I'd be more than happy to have a coffee with you to talk through our products in our stack and how we execute according to those learning points that I'll be sharing shortly. There you go. So this is an overview of our digital utility stack. When we talk about digital utilities, it's interchangeable to how we talk about digital public infrastructure. So it's very typical, the 4 different foundational parts of DUs. The first one is we have our digital identity, which I think some of you are familiar as SingPass. Some of the key questions that we carve out to determine whether it's foundational is what's delineated on the slide. So for example, how do people and enterprises identify themselves in digital transactions? That's the use case that this digital ID is meant to serve. Then we have e-payments and e-invoicing. I think from one of the presenters, I think it was India, it gave me a lot of joy to see UPI and PayNow, so that's great. PayNow is our product where we enable consumers and citizens to transfer money that is tagged to their phone number and their bank account. We also have that for businesses. A little different from just the transfer of payments is more of the issuing of invoices, as we're always looking at not just citizens and consumers, but looking at businesses as well, of how we can utilize DPI. Our third digital utility is document attestation. Again, probably quite familiar, because I think in the Pakistan presentation, there was a lot of sharing around that, especially around birth certificates. So we also have that capability as well. The key question that we ask in terms of validating if it's a worthwhile DPI for us is, how do we check the authenticity of digital documents, such as birth certificates are pretty essential, or other notarized documents one would need. We also look at that in our business sectors. So for example, in our trade industry, where we have trade documents that we also attest for. And lastly, we have data exchange. Key question we ask here in how we design and approach is, how do we exchange digital information in a trusted and secure manner? This digital utility is more catered to businesses, and I'll share a bit more about the areas that it covers. This clicker's not working. Oh, there we go. This is an overview of the DU stack a level down. So the top level is what I was just describing in terms of the digital utilities. Below are the products. So for example, where it says digital identity, the first column, CorpPass, is the identity for our businesses or companies. And then SingPass is for citizens or consumers. E-payments and invoicing, same thing. Products is for the consumers as well as for businesses. You'll notice this trend, the way we approach DPI is we look at the citizen consumer and we also look at how do we serve businesses as well. So there's document attestation. The buckets you see on the bottom where it says trade trust, health certs, open certs, those are specific sectors of where we attest like documents. So for example, trade trust is in the trade industry, health certs in healthcare such as COVID vaccination documents. Open certs is looking at our educational certifications in the manner that's issued and attested. And lastly, we have data exchange, which I think was shared earlier in the introduction of the panelists, that we have the Findex and the Tradex where we pull data from consumers and businesses on their financial and user profile. So I just went over the stack of the products and services we have, and this is the background to how we think about why did we build this, why did we propagate this and drive the adoption. This is our goal. It's foundational functionality, back to the point of, when we ask those key questions, what is it meant to serve? Who is it meant to serve? The harmonization and interoperability, our goal is always thinking about how we can remove ourselves from just walled gardens, not just domestically, but across borders through our DU stack. Provision of trust and security, which, of course, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, to be able to conduct and transact digitally knowing it's safe and secure. And lastly, broad-based adoption. This goes back to kind of how we think about DPI for Singapore. We always think global, but we act local in the sense that we want to make sure we can drive the adoption so we can support our own businesses and consumers before we go overseas. I don't know how many of you have been to Singapore, but it's a pretty small country. We're a pretty small market, so we're constantly obliged to think beyond our borders in that respect. Which leads us to share about our DPI approach. Everything that we think about and how we conceive, design, and execute is always aligned to this approach. Think global, act local. So what that means really is when we think global, it's back to the point of our story is we're a very small nation, don't have the natural resources, and we're always constantly thinking creatively about how do we plug ourselves in the global digital economy. Now, we act local through the adoption and drive of our DPI stack, but we're always thinking about how do we bring our businesses and citizens to connect with a wider digital community. And that's what we do through DPI. Our goal and ambition here is to advance cross-border use cases that support interoperability so that we can facilitate the flow of people, goods, data/assets, so that we can all benefit from the global digital economy. So I'm going to just share what that means in terms of our approach. How do we conceive and execute against our DPI? I'm not going to go into too much detail, but again, I'm happy to have coffee with anyone. Feel free to reach out to me and I can share with you the specific product journey of how we applied and executed this. So overall, these are the four principles to think global, act local. So we try to align to dominant international standards. The thinking here is that to build scale, ensure interoperability, we have to make sure that the standards that we advocate or adhere to, that there is a critical mass. Otherwise, it creates fragmentation, and then we want to avoid situations of just building DPI from scratch. There's really no need for that. And we're always leveraging on public-private partnerships, as mentioned earlier, the double proposition of private sector coming on board as well as the public sector. You can get your quick wins a lot faster. Facilitating cross-border transactions, that is one of our main objectives. It's part of our goal in terms of going global, and it's a way to build a path for sustained interoperability. The last part is looking at how we look at things locally. When we mention drive adoption and utilization, we try to kickstart and drive the network effect. What that means is that we employ a lot of domestic regulatory levers. So these could be like grants, for example, to incentivize users to come on board and use the DPI products and services. Or we could incentivize the supply side, meaning tech companies, tech providers who may innovate and build services on top of the DPI stack to make it more attractive for users. And we also deploy a lot of like marketing campaigns domestically so that we could create a brand for DPI, again, to drive adoption and usage. So just to recap, these are the four principles of how we execute against our approach when we think about DPI, such as think global, act local. So I'm just going to share a bit about how we align to dominant international standards. There we go. So as mentioned, we try to look for tried and tested frameworks that are clear, technically proven, no need to start from scratch. There is a global community that we can be plugged into. Of course, there are spaces that are quite new and nascent. We understand that. And our approach in such instances is to talk to the international community, talk about, okay, what could be the standards, but always premised on it being open. We are very big on global interoperability and making sure that everyone can get plugged into that global digital economy. In terms of the public-private partnerships, there we go. As mentioned, DPI doesn't need to be entirely built or managed by the government. The way we see the P in DPI is that it's not just public, but it's also private in service of the public to enjoy. So we have a couple of companies that have worked on our DPI, which is an interesting model where we have both a public and private ownership of certain companies that manage and deploy DPI. Happy again to have coffee to talk more about that. And again, it's just leveraging the strengths of both parties, the public and private sector. This is about facilitating cross-border transactions to build a path for sustained interoperability. So the way we do this is that we often try to secure government-to-government legal frameworks. Yes, they can be quite broad, and they have very long timelines of negotiation, but it gives an opportunity for countries to come together to talk about the different sectors where, for example, if we wanted to conduct any use cases around document attestation and recognizing those documents, oftentimes technology is not the problem. That's the most simple thing to solve, actually. The challenging thing is bringing stakeholders to the table to align on interest as well as governance approach. So this is a route that we take in parallel. We don't bank everything just on getting G2G legal frameworks. We also work with the private sector and industry because we recognize that that is a way to kickstart interest in certain DPI that can bring governments on board. So the way we approach things, it's not that you have to have the G2G framework right away in order to start anything. We believe that you can always do trials and test with countries, and hopefully that can bring the industry on board. That's how we approach looking at how we could start cross-border transactions, because frankly, it's a pretty tough endeavor when you have to try to get all your ducks in line for something like that scale. So this one I won't cover too much because I did talk about how we act local, and this is deploying some of our in-house regulatory levers, may they be grants or marketing campaigns. The real goal here is to bring companies as well as consumers on board to use our DPI. So this is also a success factor that's helped us. Yeah. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too deep into our Next-bound DPI because I think there will be probably Q&A around this. But I can just share as the top line, just a teaser here, is that for Singapore, we're always thinking ahead. But when we do think ahead, I go back to that approach motto of think global, act local. And our interests is to find willing partners to collaborate in cross-border use cases where we're really interested in questions about, how do we advance more trust in the ecosystem? We recognize that our ID, it's a centralized system, and that there are benefits to looking at a decentralized architecture where there is lower security assurances, but it also helps companies and consumers get plugged in the global digital economy. Because obviously, when you have a centralized ID system, there are challenges to certain use cases, especially when you're dealing with cross-border. There's a lot of security. So we're trying to think about how can we be creative and think about some of those quick wins. I think some of the panelists were talking about working with the private sector, just to think about how can we advance thinking around decentralized tech to benefit consumers and businesses with use cases where we're not just limited to high security assurances. I think in the Q&A we'll probably go through some of that, and I can share about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. So we're going to move now to one round of question in the interest of time, because I know the next session is likely going to start soon. We'll keep it to one question each. So I'm going to start with Tanya. So Pakistan is strengthening, as you talked about, the institutional arrangements on digitalization. And how are you working across sectors to develop those key use cases?
Yeah, and Vijanti, I talked a little bit about this in the presentation. The realization that ultimately, if you look at the national level, there are sort of 4 or 5 very critical stakeholders that already have large pools of data on our citizens, and ultimately they need to be willing to come together as part of this broader effort or initiative, which means they have to be willing. So oftentimes what happens is people hold on to their data like this, whether it's businesses or citizen data. So how do you get them to play ball? And then as you look sector specifically, how do you get, and again, then you start to get more granular, how do you get players within those to start to play ball? So as we've looked to, again, through an enactment of law, build a new body, which is, it's meant to be designed as an empowered structure that can derive power from the very top, but has the ability to execute alongside several of these key stakeholders. I think the key lesson we've learned is if people feel like you're stepping on their turf, and it's critical. If you show up and you say, hey, I know how to do your job better than you do, you can basically kiss getting anything done goodbye. So, how do you help make other people look great? And the idea behind getting this new body set up is not for this body to look like it's being successful. It's actually to be the enabler to make sort of existing ministries and the whole of government. Ultimately, it has to be a whole of government approach to start to move on to that journey by being a key enabler. But it has to be done through an act of law. We've tried going at it by saying, hey, create an advisory role, and what it ends up happening is ultimately when it gets down to execution, things will fall through the cracks. So you need almost the authority to execute on what needs to get done.
Thank you. So Abhishek, you're leading the India AI mission, and India set very high ambitions on AI. Can you talk about how you're taking the lessons of India's DPI journey and applying it now to AI?
See, a lot of lessons, and in fact, the way we have designed our India AI mission is to ensure that artificial intelligence solutions, AI-based solutions, sit at the top of the DPIs and try to make DPIs much more efficient and much more effective. Like, for example, we have solutions in healthcare under the DPIs, whether it's the eSanjeevani telemedicine solution or Aishan Bharat Health Mission. But the kind of data that is generated by DPI, there's a huge opportunity to build AI models on top of it to make healthcare more accessible. Similarly, for agriculture, farmers, we have a lot of DPIs in agriculture, but if we apply the AI layer and try to use image recognition, try to use NLP to offer AI-based services, the value becomes much more. Like, for example, voice-based services is something that we are working on as part of AI. We have a project called Bhashini, which allows interface in 22 Indian languages for accessing services. Because we know that a farmer, if he has to access a service, for him to go to a website or download an app or navigate a CAPTCHA is pretty challenging. But a farmer would be more than happy to give a voice query and get a reply back on voice. And today's AI-based technologies, the automatic speech recognition or text-to-speech solutions and then the generative AI models have that possibility. So for example, if a farmer wants to ask when should he harvest his crop or which market he should sell his crop so that he gets the best price, or if he wants to ask about some expert with regard to a disease or a pest that is there, he can give a voice-based query. And what we have tried is that these voice-based queries not only work on smartphones, but they also work on feature phones, low-cost feature phones, and a toll-free number in which a farmer can give a query and get the reply back. And such kind of solutions work in almost all sectors for giving in information for various services, for public services, for law and order, for urban management. In fact, we have a startup which is working with some cities in which they are using image recognition to identify which are the places where there are potholes or there are manhole covers missing or there's garbage which is dumped or street lights not working or traffic lights not working. And that information is sourced through the delivery boys, the food delivery boys, the cab aggregators when they are navigating the city. And those images are clicked and they are geotagged. And then the control room analyzes those images, and there are teams which are dispatched to solve these solutions. So several applications, whether it's image recognition, NLP, AI is bringing a layer on DPI that's making DPIs more efficient, more effective, more accessible.
Wonderful, thank you. And the last question to Elizabeth, if you can just delve in a little bit more on the new DPI innovations.
Yeah. So we've been looking at trust technologies such as decentralized ID, supported by, for example, verified credentials. Right now, we're in very early kind of exploratory conversations actually with India and working with CDPI on a use case to recognize educational certifications. Hopefully that extends to job certifications. We're exploring about, how do we disintermediate third parties and streamline transactional economies such as like the job hiring market. So one way we're doing this is looking at, for example, inbound flows of Indian professionals and recognizing their educational certificates and making it a lot more easier where hiring companies, they may not necessarily need background screening companies in the future. It's disintermediating third parties and making it much more faster and cheaper to hire from across borders. And eventually it also benefits our own local companies in their hiring needs. As part of this endeavor to bring home some of the messages earlier, we are working with private sector companies in terms of when we look at, I won't go into the technical detail, but how we might verify some of those certificates, how we build those mechanisms, because we always think it's important, what is the government's role? We're not necessarily here to build the infrastructure, but we are here to perhaps influence the standards and also play a role as an orchestrator. So this is one example of a very early use case that we're working on with India on right now.
I think there's going to be a lot of learning for many other countries on that, and several countries are underway. So hopefully we can get all of you together and make sure the same standards and protocols for those. So I know that there's probably a lot more questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I know that people are eager to conclude all of these sessions and get to the dinner. But if we can thank all three of you. I mean, every time I hear this, I've heard each of these stories many, many times, but I keep hearing nuggets, and I just want to end with some of the nuggets, and this is not a complete. So citizen at its center, the importance of leadership and vision. This is a change management agenda, not really a technology agenda. How important the partnership with private sector and focusing on those quick wins. So thank you for all three of you, and look forward, and I'm sure many people will be stopping you at the hallways and asking more questions, but thank you again for joining us on this panel.